The sun in the Levant does not rise. It colonizes the sky, a relentless, white-hot weight that turns the horizon into a shimmering blade of heat before the morning prayer has even left our parched throats. To be a crusader is not to live in a state of perpetual battle or religious ecstasy. It is to live in a state of profound, grinding, and absolute physical discomfort, a slow war of attrition waged against the elements, the dust, and the staggering weight of our own expectations. My day begins in the gray pre-dawn light of a camp that smells of wet wool, stale bread, and the iron tang of horse manure. The first sound of the day is not a trumpet, but the rhythmic, grating sound of a whetstone against a blade, a dry, repetitive shuck, shuck, shuck that serves as the heartbeat of the morning. I am a man of the cross, but mostly I am a man of the pack. Before I even think of my soul, I must think of my feet. I spend 20 minutes in the dim light checking the soles of my leather boots for cracks, rubbing a bit of rendered animal fat into the seams to keep the grit of the road from grinding the skin into a bloody pulp. There is no glory in a blister, only the slow, limping reality of a man who can no longer keep pace with the column. The process of donning the armor is a tedious liturgy of leather and steel that leaves no room for the imagination. First comes the gambeson, a thick, quilted tunic of linen stuffed with horsehair and scrap wool. It is heavy, it is stiff, and it is permanently damp with the salt of yesterday's sweat. It smells of vinegar and human rot. I pull it over my head, and for a moment I am trapped in a dark, airless world of musty fabric until I find the neck hole. Then comes the hauberk, the chainmail shirt that is the true burden of my office. It weighs 30 pounds, a mass of thousands of interlocking iron rings that must be lifted over the head and settled onto the shoulders. The weight is not distributed. It hangs, pulling at the trapezius muscles and compressing the spine. I spend 10 minutes adjusting the belt, trying to shift some of the weight from my shoulders to my hips, a futile exercise in physics that I repeat every single morning. The metal is cold at first, a shocking bite against the arms, but within the hour it will become a furnace, soaking up the Palestinian sun until it threatens to sear the skin through the layers of cloth. I am a knight of the faith, but I feel more like a beast of burden, a walking mountain of iron, moving through a desert that wants nothing more than to swallow my remains. The march begins not with a charge, but with a shuffle. We move at the speed of the slowest ox in the baggage train, a pace that is agonizingly slow and soul-crushingly repetitive. My world narrows to the back of the man in front of me, the faded red cross on his surcoat, the way his scabbard slaps against his thigh with every third step, the dust that rises from his heels and settles into the moisture of my eyes. We do not speak. Speaking wastes breath, and breath is a precious commodity when the air is thick with the fine, powdery silt of the road. I count my steps. I count them in blocks of 100. 100 steps to that gnarled olive tree. 100 steps to that cluster of sun-bleached rocks. I have calculated that I take approximately 2,000 steps for every mile, and we have 15 miles to cover before the sun reaches its zenith. The math is the only thing that keeps my mind from collapsing into the void of boredom. I am a mathematician of the mundane, calculating the distance between thirst and the next well. Water is the central character of our existence, or rather, the lack of it. We carry leather skins, but the water inside them quickly turns warm and tastes of the animal it came from. It is a flat, tepid liquid that provides no refreshment, only a temporary reprieve from the feeling that my tongue has turned into a piece of dry leather. I find myself thinking about the streams of my home in the Ardennes. The cold, clear, rushing water that tasted of minerals and winter. Here, the water is a luxury that must be guarded with a sword. We stop at a cistern, and the process of watering the army takes 4 hours. I stand in the sun, my helmet a leaden weight on my skull, watching the buckets go down and come up. I watch the rope rub against the stone rim, a slow, rhythmic creak groan that becomes the only sound in the world. I watch a beetle struggle to climb a blade of parched grass. It falls. It tries again. It falls. This is the most interesting thing that will happen all day. The afternoon is a haze of heat delirium. The sun is now directly overhead, and the armor has become a physical enemy. The sweat pours down my face, stinging my eyes and pooling in the bottom of my coif. My skin is an itchy, burning map of irritation. I can feel the lice moving in the seams of my gambeson, a constant nagging reminder of the filth we live in. We are told we are purifying our souls, but we are primarily accumulating grime. I find a new game to pass the time. I imagine the internal workings of the camp followers behind us. I wonder how many loaves of bread the bakers can produce in a day. I wonder how many shoes the cobbler has to patch. I imagine the weight of the grain in the sacks. I am a man of God, but I am preoccupied with the logistics of survival. There is no room for theology when your left big toe is gone numb and the strap of your shield is chafing a raw hole in your forearm. By the time we make camp, the sun is a bruised purple bruise on the horizon, and the physical exhaustion is a heavy, dull roar in the ears. We do not feast. We eat hardtack, a flour and water biscuit that is so hard it must be soaked in wine or water to be edible without breaking the teeth. It tastes of nothing but dust and age. I sit on a rock, my legs trembling with a fine, uncontrollable vibration, and I begin the maintenance of the steel. This is the hidden reality of the crusade, the endless, repetitive cleaning. The salt from the sweat is the enemy of iron. I take a piece of rough sandcloth and begin to rub the links of my mail, a dry, scratching sound that fills the evening air. One ring at a time. I check the hinges of my gauntlets. I oil the leather of my scabbard. I am the servant of the equipment. If I neglect the steel will fail me, and there is no glory in a rusted blade. The night is not a time of rest, but a time of cold. The desert loses its heat as quickly as it gained it, and the air turns sharp and thin. I lie on a thin wool blanket, the ground hard and unforgiving beneath my ribs. I look up at the stars, strange, bright constellations that I do not recognize. They look down with a cold, indifferent light. I hear the rhythmic snoring of the men around me, the shifting of the horses in the picket line, the distant, lonely howl of a jackal. These are the sounds of the holy war. It is not the clash of steel. It is the sound of thousands of men breathing, waiting, and enduring. I find myself thinking about the grain harvest back home, the smell of the damp earth after a rain, the sound of the wind in the pines. I am thousands of miles away, standing guard over a dream that feels increasingly like a ledger of small, agonizing details. I am a crusader, but tonight I am just a man who is tired of the smell of his own armor, waiting for the sun to rise and colonize the sky all over again. The siege of a city in the Levant is not a grand climax of martial prowess. It is a stagnant, airless purgatory of engineering and patience, where the greatest enemies are not the archers on the battlements, but the dysentery in the latrines and the soul-crushing weight of the passage of days. We have been sitting before these limestone walls for 7 weeks, and the initial fire of our arrival has long since been extinguished by the relentless, dusty monotony of the blockade. My life has shrunk from the vast horizons of the march to a narrow, sun-scorched trench that smells of lime, waste, and the sickly sweet rot of the animal carcasses we've thrown into the dead space between the lines. Every morning begins the same. The sun hits the top of the enemy's minarets, and I wake up in a shallow dugout, my mouth feeling like it is lined with dry wool, the grit of the desert floor having found its way into every crease of my skin and every link of my mail. The first 4 hours of my day are dedicated to the corvée, the mandatory labor that turns a knight into a common ditch digger. There is no heraldry in the shovel. I spend the morning moving earth, filling wicker gabions with rocks and soil to create a breastwork that will protect the sappers. The rhythm is hypnotic and numbing. Thrust the spade into the sun-baked clay. Feel the vibration travel up the wooden shaft and into the hollow ache of my shoulders. Lift, turn, and dump. I do this hundreds of times, my world reduced to the square foot of dirt directly beneath my boots. I watch the way the dust settles on my sweaty forearms, turning the hair into a gray, mud-caked mat. I count the baskets. 60 baskets make a foot of wall. We need 12 feet today. The math is a slow-motion torture. We are trying to build a mountain of dirt to conquer a mountain of stone, and the earth is stubborn, dry, and unforgiving. By midday, the heat has become a physical presence, a thick, shimmering curtain that distorts the sight. The siege engines, the great mangonels and trebuchets, stand like skeletal giants against the white sky. They are the true masters of this place. I am assigned to the winding detail for the largest engine, a machine we've named the Silent Hunger. The task is a grueling, repetitive labor of mechanical precision. 6 of us grip the massive wooden winches, our feet braced against the sun-cracked timber frame. We begin to turn. The hempen ropes, thick as a man's thigh, groan and stretch with a sound like a ship's hull in a storm. A long, agonizing creak, snap, groan. We turn the winch 1 notch at a time. Each notch is a victory over physics. Each notch takes 20 seconds of sustained, gritting effort. It takes 48 notches to pull the arm to its full tension. I watch the grease on the iron axle, black and viscous, as it oozes from the friction. I smell the scorched wood and the hot hemp. We do this for hours, winding and releasing, sending a single massive boulder into the air to strike a wall that hasn't moved an inch in 50 days. The sound of the impact is a dull, distant thud, followed by the cheers of the camp followers that sound thin and hollow in the vast, empty heat. Water, once again, is the obsession that ruins the mind. The local wells were poisoned or filled with stones by the retreating garrison, so we rely on the water train, a line of pack mules that brings skins from a muddy spring 4 miles away. I spend an hour standing in the shade of a dusty hide awning, waiting for my ration. The man in front of me is a Flemish knight whose name I've forgotten, though I know the exact pattern of the rust on his hauberk. We stand in silence, watching the water being measured out with a copper ladle. Every drop that spills into the dust is a tragedy. I receive my share, a lukewarm, brackish liquid that smells of wet leather and sulfur. I drink it slowly, letting it sit in my mouth to fool my brain into thinking it is enough. It is never enough. My skin is perpetually dry, flaking off in white scales that itch beneath my gambeson, but I cannot scratch them. To scratch is to invite the red rash, a skin fire that turns into a weeping sore in this humidity. The afternoon is a period of watchful stagnation. I am posted at the edge of the trench, my shield propped up against a timber beam to provide a sliver of shade. My duty is to watch for sallies, sudden bursts of activity from the city gates. But in reality, I am watching the heat waves dance on the limestone. I begin to count the bricks in the lower course of the North Tower. I have reached 412. I suspect there are over 10,000 in the tower alone. I spend 2 hours trying to estimate how many man-hours it took the Saracens to build that tower, and how many man-hours it will take us to pull it down. I am a clerk of destruction, a bookkeeper of rubble. I watch a lizard dart across a hot stone, its throat pulsing with a rapid, rhythmic beat. I envy its stillness, its perfect adaptation to this furnace. I, conversely, am a creature of cold forests and damp earth, trapped in a suit of iron that is slowly cooking me in my own salt. Sometimes a message is shot over the wall by a bowman, a piece of parchment wrapped around a blunt arrow. It is always a taunt or a demand for surrender that we cannot fulfill. We do not even bother to read them anymore. They are just more litter in a camp that is already drowning in its own refuse. I find myself contemplating the laundry. My surcoat, once a vibrant white with a crimson cross, is now the color of a wet road. I spend 20 minutes picking a loose thread from my sleeve, unraveling it inch by inch until it breaks. This is the highlight of my afternoon. There is no talk of the Holy Sepulchre. There is no talk of the kingdom of heaven. There is only talk of the price of onions in the rear camp and whose mule died in the night. The crusade has been hollowed out by the heat, leaving only the mechanical shell of the army. As the sun begins to dip, the sapping begins in earnest. This is the most claustrophobic and tedious of all tasks. I am sent into the tunnels, narrow, shored-up burrows that run beneath the enemy walls. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth, tallow candles, and the sweat of the miners. It is a world of absolute, oppressive gray. I sit in the dark, my back against a wooden prop, holding a candle for the men who are hacking away at the stone with iron picks. The sound is a constant, rhythmic tink, 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 a sound that vibrates through the earth and into my skull. I watch the shadows of the picks on the tunnel wall, giant, distorted shapes that look like the wings of bats. We are digging our own graves, hoping to find the foundation of the tower before the tunnel collapses. I count the strokes of the pick. 300 strokes. Then the men swap. 300 strokes. My candle flickers in the stale air, the flames struggling for oxygen, mirroring my own shallow, dusty breathing. When I finally emerge from the tunnel, the stars are out. The camp is a city of fires, but they bring no warmth, only a flickering, uncertain light that makes the ruins around us look like a nightmare. I return to my tent, which I share with 3 other men. We do not speak of the day. We are too tired for words. I perform the ritual of the lynx, running a dry cloth over my chainmail to catch the moisture of the evening mist. If I miss a spot, the rust will bite through by morning. I check my sword, pulling it 3 inches from the scabbard to ensure the oil hasn't dried. It is a dull, gray blade, devoid of the shine it had in the cathedrals of Europe. I lie down on the hard-packed earth, my body still feeling the vibration of the picks, the groan of the winches, and the heavy thud of the spade. I am a crusader, but I am merely a gear in a very slow, very dirty machine. I close my eyes and try to imagine the sound of rain on a slate roof. But all I can hear is the wind whistling through the siege towers and the distant, eternal tink, tink, tink of the picks in the dark. The journey from the collapsed walls of a broken city back to the coastal ports is not a triumphal march. It is a long, shuddering crawl across a landscape of dust and bone, conducted from the back of a flatbed supply cart that possesses no springs and no mercy. My crusade has ended not with a blow to a sultan, but with the wasting fever, a slow, parasitic heat that has hollowed out my muscles and left my limbs feeling like water-soaked timber. I am no longer a knight. I am baggage. I spend my days staring upward at the underside of a tattered canvas canopy that flaps rhythmically in the dry wind. Slap, billow, slap, billow. A sound that has become the entire perimeter of my world. The cart moves at the pace of a walking man, every stone in the Roman road sending a jarring vibration through the wooden axle, up through the floorboards, and directly into my spine. I have learned to count the miles by the specific jolts. A sharp crack for a limestone rock, a deep, hollow thud for a pothole, a long, agonizing creak for a sandy drift. My armor, once my pride and my burden, now sits in a wooden chest at my feet. I can hear the chainmail shifting with every turn of the wheels, a metallic, rasping shur that sounds like a nesting snake. It is a dead weight now, a collection of iron rings that I no longer have the strength to lift, let alone wear. I find myself staring at the chest for hours, memorizing the grain of the oak, the rusted head of a single iron nail that stands slightly proud of the wood, and the way the dust settles in the grooves of the lid. I am a cartographer of the mundane, mapping the 3 square feet of space I occupy. The heat is a constant, heavy presence, a thick layer of stagnant air that sits under the canvas, smelling of sun-scorched flax, the rancid grease used on the wheels, and the pungent, ammonia-sharp scent of the oxen pulling us. I watch the back of the ox driver, a man whose tunic is so caked with salt it has turned stiff and white. He doesn't speak to me. To him, I am just another piece of the load, less valuable than the sacks of grain, but more troublesome than the spare yokes. The monotony of the landscape is a form of sensory deprivation. Through the back of the cart, I see a narrow ribbon of the world retreating. It is always the same, a scorched plain of yellowish grass, a cluster of gray skeletal olive trees that look like they haven't seen rain since the time of the apostles, and the shimmering liquid haze of the horizon. I have invented a game to pass the hours. I predict how many turns of the wheel it will take to reach a specific shadow on the road. I count. 1, 2, 3. The wheel is slightly out of true, so every fourth rotation has a distinct limping hitch. 1, 2, 3, hitch. 1, 2, 3, hitch. I calculate that there are roughly 400 rotations to a mile. We travel perhaps 10 miles on a good day. 4,000 hitches. I am a bookkeeper of the road, recording the passage of my life in the rotations of a warped wooden circle. Midday brings the halt of the heat, a 2-hour period where the sun is too dangerous for the beasts to move. The cart stops in the middle of a featureless expanse. The silence that rushes in is absolute, broken only by the heavy, wet panting of the oxen and the occasional dry click of a cooling iron rim. I lie there, the sweat pooling in the hollow of my throat, watching a single fly explore the rim of my water skin. I don't move to brush it away. I don't have the energy to spare. I watch the fly's legs, tiny black threads, as they navigate the texture of the leather. This is the most intimacy I have had with a living creature in weeks. I think about the concept of holy war and find that I cannot connect the words to my current reality. There is no holiness in the smell of unwashed wool and the taste of lukewarm, brackish water. There is only the endurance of the flesh. I am a man of the cross, but my cross is made of pine boards and sits beneath me, vibrating with every pebble. In the late afternoon, the shadows begin to stretch, and the light turns a deep, honeyed amber that would be beautiful if it didn't signal the coming of the evening chill. The fever always spikes with the sunset. I feel the heat rising from my chest, a dry, internal fire that makes the canvas canopy seem to pulse and glow. I begin to hallucinate, but my hallucinations are as boring as my reality. I don't see angels or demons. I see the stone walls of my father's barn. I see the way the hay was stacked in the corner. I see the rhythmic movement of a scythe through a wheat field. Swish, thud, swish, thud. I am back in the Ardennes, but I am still in the cart. The two realities overlap, a blurry mess of gray stone and yellow dust. I find myself trying to count the rafters in a barn that is 1,000 miles away, while my fingers trace the splinters in the floorboards of a cart that is currently crossing a dry wadi. The nights are a different kind of labor. We do not set a proper camp. The driver simply unhitches the oxen and ties them to the cart. I stay in the back, the cold desert air descending like a heavy, damp shroud. The stars come out, thousands of them, sharp and cold as diamonds. I watch them through the gap in the canvas. I know that if I were a navigator, I could find my way home by them, but I am just a passenger in a box of wood. I listen to the sounds of the night, the rhythmic chewing of the oxen, a wet grinding sound that never stops, the distant lonely yapping of a jackal, and the snoring of the driver beneath the wheels. I feel the thirst again, a sharp metallic ache in the back of my throat. I reach for the water skin, and the movement is a massive undertaking. I have to brace my elbow, shift my weight, and pull. The leather is cool, but the water inside is flat and tastes of the goat it was taken from. I take 2 sips, no more. I am a miser of my own survival. By the time the first gray light of dawn touches the canvas, I am already awake, staring at the same tattered seam I saw yesterday. I check the nail in the chest. It hasn't moved. I check the grain of the wood. It hasn't changed. I am a witness to the unchanging nature of the world. The driver wakes up, hawks a thick glob of phlegm into the dust, and begins the process of hitching the oxen. Jingle, grunt, creak. The cart lurches forward, the first jolt of the day sending a familiar shock through my hips. 1, 2, 3, hitch. 1, 2, 3, hitch. I am back on the road. I am moving toward a ship that will take me to a sea, that will take me to a shore that I no longer quite believe exists. I am a crusader, a knight of the faith, a defender of the Holy Land. But mostly, I am a man in a cart, counting the rotations of a broken wheel, waiting for the dust to finally settle. The arrival at the port of Acre is not the joyous culmination of a pilgrimage, but a transition from the dusty monotony of the road to the salt-caked, stagnant bureaucracy of the harbor. The cart finally stops on a quay made of massive, sun-bleached limestone blocks, and the sudden cessation of the 1, 2, 3, hitch rhythm of the wheels is so jarring that it feels as though the world has stopped breathing. I am lifted from the cart by two sailors whose skin is the color of old mahogany and whose breath smells of sour wine and pickled fish. They handle me like a bale of spoiled wool, their movements efficient and utterly devoid of reverence for my rank or my cross. I am deposited onto a pile of hempen sacks filled with dried chickpeas, where I am told to wait. My world has shifted from a canvas canopy to a vertical slice of the maritime world. The towering tar-streaked hull of a Genoese cog, the rhythmic slap, slap of the Mediterranean against the pilings, and the endless, dizzying geometry of the rigging against a sky that is finally beginning to lose its desert glare. The wait for embarkation takes 3 days. I spend these 72 hours in a state of hyper-focused observation of things that do not matter. I watch the way the shadows of the masts move across the quay, a slow sundial crawl that marks the passage of a morning. I watch the stevedores loading the ship, a line of men moving in a constant circular loop, carrying amphorae of oil, crates of spices, and the heavy iron-bound chests of departing knights. I count the crates, 112 on the first day, 89 on the second. I begin to recognize the specific creak of each winch on the deck above. The forward winch has a high-pitched metallic scree, while the main winch has a deep, guttural groan thud. I am a scholar of the pulley, a historian of the cargo net. There is no talk of the fall of the city or the loss of the true cross here. The only language is the shouting of the portmaster and the rhythmic chanting of the sailors as they haul on the lines. When I am finally carried up the gangplank, the sensation of the ship beneath me is a new form of discomfort. A ship is never still. It is a creature of constant, subtle heaving, a rhythmic rise and settle that makes the floorboards feel untrustworthy. I am placed in the 'tween decks, a low-ceilinged cavern of oak and pine that is perpetually shrouded in a thick amber gloom. The air here is a physical weight, a mixture of wet bilge water, the smell of 80 men packed into a space meant for 40, the pungent scent of the livestock on the upper deck, and the omnipresent, suffocating smell of the tar used to seal them seams. I am assigned a space on the deck boards, exactly 2 feet wide and 6 feet long. I spend the first 4 hours of the voyage mapping the ceiling beams. There is a knot in the oak directly above my head that looks like the eye of a dead fish. I stare at it until it becomes the center of my universe. The voyage across the Mediterranean is a masterpiece of boredom. My life is reduced to the bell of the watch. Every 4 hours, a bell rings on the deck above, a sharp bronze cling cling, marking the passage of time in a world that has no landmarks. We eat hard sea biscuits that are even more ancient than the ones in the desert. They are infested with weevils, small black beetles that must be tapped out against the wood before eating. I spend 20 minutes tapping each biscuit. Tap, tap, tap. I watch the beetles crawl away across the damp boards. I count them. 6 from the first biscuit, 9 from the second. I have calculated that at this rate, I am consuming approximately 300 beetles per week. This is the only statistic that defines my progress toward Europe. The sound of the ship becomes the only music I know. There is the hiss of the water against the hull, the creak of the great mast in its step, the thrum of the wind in the rigging, and the constant rhythmic thud, thud of the tiller arm. I find myself predicting the rhythm of the waves. A large wave hits the port side every 12 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, thud. If the wave hits at 11 seconds, I feel a strange sense of unease, as if the world is out of balance. I am a captive of the 12-second cycle. I lie on my thin, salt-crusted blanket, my fever having subsided into a dull, persistent ache in my joints, and I watch the way the lantern hanging from the beam swings. It traces a perfect arc, back and forth, back and forth. I count the swings. It takes 3 seconds for a full arc, 20 arcs a minute, 1,200 arcs an hour. I have watched the lantern for 6 hours today. 7,200 arcs. Sometimes the ship falls into a doldrum, a state of absolute stillness where the sails hang limp and the water becomes a sheet of polished lead. These are the worst days. Without the movement of the ship, the smell of the 'tween decks becomes a lethal, stagnant fog. The heat rises, and the men begin to bicker in low, weary voices. They argue about the price of salt in Marseille, the lineage of a horse that died in Tripoli, the correct way to sharpen a misericord. I do not join them. I have forgotten how to use my voice for anything other than a cough. I am a ghost of the Levant, a hollow suit of skin waiting to be filled with the air of a different world. I find a small crack in the hull where a tiny sliver of light enters. I watch the way the light reflects off the dust motes in the air. Here, in the middle of the sea, the dust is different. It is whiter, cleaner, made of dried salt and the pulverized remains of the Mediterranean. The nights on the ship are a descent into a cold, damp void. The sound of the water is louder in the dark, a constant rushing whoosh that sounds like the breath of a leviathan. I listen to the heartbeat of the ship, the rhythmic clank-clank of the pump as the sailors clear the bilge. It is a slow, mechanical pulse that reminds me that we are only a few inches of wood away from the bottom of the world. I find myself thinking about my armor in the chest. I imagine the salt air eating into the iron, the rust forming in the tiny crevices of the links. I should get up and oil it, but the thought of moving my arms is an exhausting mountain of effort. Let it rust. Let the iron return to the earth. I am no longer a knight, I am a survivor of a ledger of days that have no meaning. As we pass the Straits of Messina, the air begins to change. It loses the sharp metallic tang of the east and begins to smell of land, of wet soil, of wood smoke, of green things. The men on the deck begin to shout, but their voices sound thin and distant to me in my wooden tomb. I do not go up to look. I know what the horizon looks like. It is a line that never moves. I wait for the only thing that matters, the thud of the ship against the dock in Marseille. I wait for the moment when the 12-second cycle of the waves finally stops, and the world becomes solid and silent once again. I am a crusader returning from the Holy Land, but I am not bringing back the keys to the kingdom. I am bringing back a memory of 40,000 rotations of a wagon wheel, 12,000 arcs of a swinging lantern, and the knowledge that the world is a very large, very slow, and very dusty place. I close my eyes and listen to the hiss of the water, counting the seconds until the next wave. 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12. The quay in Marseille is a shock of solid, unyielding stone that does not heave with the tide, a terrifyingly stable reality that makes my legs feel like they are made of water. I am lowered onto the dock, my chest of rusted armor clattering beside me, and I sit there for 4 hours, simply watching the way the shadow of a warehouse moves across the cobblestones. The bustling port is a blur of noise, merchants screaming in a dialect that sounds like a half-remembered song, the sharp crack of whips against the flanks of mules, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of barrels being rolled down wooden ramps. I am a ghost in a world of commerce. People step around me as if I am a discarded crate, and I find a strange, hollow comfort in being invisible. My journey home is not a hero's return. It is a 1,000-mile walk through the mud and the rain, a slow, solitary trek through a landscape that has forgotten the Crusades, even as I carry the weight of them in every aching joint. I begin the walk northward, a journey that will take me months of slow, shuffling progress. My world has shrunk to the width of the dirt track beneath my feet. I have become a connoisseur of the road, a scholar of the different textures of European soil. There is the sticky, gray clay of the river valleys that clings to my boots until they weigh as much as my greaves once did. There is the sharp, flinty gravel of the mountain passes that bites through my thin leather soles, a constant, stinging reminder of my own mortality. I count my paces to keep the mind from drifting into the gray fog of the past. 1,000 steps to the milestone. 2,000 steps to the bend in the river. I have calculated that if I maintain a pace of 2 miles an hour, I will reach the borders of my father's lands in approximately 84 days, assuming the weather holds and my fever does not return. I am a walking clock, a mechanical man of the road. I spend my nights in the barns of peasants, or beneath the damp eaves of forest shrines. The air here is wet, a heavy, cold moisture that smells of rotting leaves, damp moss, and the sweet, cloying scent of fresh manure. It is a world away from the dry, metallic dust of the Levant. I lie in the hay, listening to the rhythmic breathing of the cattle. Hush, wheeze, hush. It is a slow, peaceful sound that anchors me to the earth. I find myself staring at the rafters of these barns, comparing them to the ceilings of the ships and the vaults of the desert tombs. The wood here is dark, stained by decades of smoke and the breath of animals. I spend hours tracing the path of a single woodworm hole, imagining the tiny, blind creature eating its way through the history of the house. I and that creature, I think. I am eating my way through the miles, moving blindly toward a home that exists only as a faded image in the back of my skull. The people I encounter on the road do not want to hear about the siege of Acre or the heat of the desert. They want to know the price of grain in the next village, or if the bridge over the Rhone is still standing. I have learned to keep my silence. When I speak, my voice sounds like two stones grinding together, a harsh, rusty sound that startles the birds. I buy my bread with the last of my silver coins, small, thin slips of metal that represent years of service. Each coin is a meal, and each meal is a day of walking. I eat the bread slowly, savoring the taste of the grain and the yeast, a flavor so complex and rich after the sea biscuits that it almost makes me weep. I spend an hour chewing a single crust, feeling the texture of the crust against my gums, a slow, sensory ritual that is the only luxury I have left. As I move further north, the trees become taller, their branches forming a dense, green canopy that filters the light into a soft, emerald gloom. The forest is a world of whispers, the rustle of a squirrel in the dry brush, the distant tap, tap, tap of a woodpecker, the low moan of the wind in the pines. I find myself stopping to touch the bark of the trees, feeling the rough, cool texture of the oak and the smooth, papery skin of the birch. These are the textures of my childhood, a tactile language that I am slowly relearning. I spend 20 minutes watching a snail cross a wet stone. I admire its persistence, the way it carries its entire world on its back, leaving a shimmering trail of silver in its wake. We are kin, the snail and I. We are both moving at the pace of the earth, ignoring the frantic world of men. One afternoon, I reach the crest of a hill and see the valley of my home. It looks smaller than I remember, a narrow strip of green tucked between the gray folds of the mountains. The castle on the hill is a tiny, dark tooth against the sky. I do not run toward it. I do not even quicken my pace. I continue the 1, 2, 1, 2 rhythm of the march, my boots striking the earth with a dull, predictable thud. I have reached the end of the ledger. I have accounted for every mile, every rotation of the wheel, every arc of the lantern. I am a man who has been emptied of his purpose and filled with the silence of the long road. I enter the village at the hour of the evening bell. The sound is different here. It is a deep, resonant bronze that speaks of peace and the closing of the day. People look at me with a vague, curious indifference. I am just another wanderer, a man with a scarred face and a heavy chest of iron. I reach the gate of my father's house, and I stop. I do not knock. I simply stand there, feeling the weight of the air on my shoulders, the smell of the hearth fire, the scent of the damp earth, the sound of the wind in the eaves. It is all exactly as it was. The world has moved on. The sun has risen and set 10,000 times, and I am back at the beginning. I am the crusader who returned, but I have brought nothing back but the knowledge of the silence. I sit on the stone bench by the gate, and I watch the first star appear in the bruised purple sky. I count the seconds until the next one. 1, 2, 3. I am the master of the slow time. I am finally home, and the silence is absolute. The life of an old man who was once a knight is not a series of grand recollections told by a roaring fire. It is a long, quiet exercise in the observation of decay and the slow, rhythmic maintenance of a world that has grown very small. I live now in a small stone cottage on the edge of the ancestral estate, a place where the air is thick with the scent of damp wood smoke and the sharp, clean smell of the pine forest. My days no longer begin with the clash of steel or the shouting of orders, but with the slow, internal inventory of my own joints. I wake before the sun, as I have for 40 years, and I spend the first hour of my day simply waiting for my hands to uncurl. They are gnarled, like the roots of the ancient hawthorn outside my door, the skin mapped with the pale scars of old blade nicks and the deep, permanent stains of the road. I watch the gray light of a northern morning as it slowly defines the rafters of my ceiling, counting the spiders that have rebuilt their webs in the night. There are 4 in the corner above the hearth, and one particularly ambitious weaver near the door. This is my new campaign, the monitoring of the spiders. I move to the hearth, my movements slow and deliberate, a physical echo of the 1-2 march I performed across 3 continents. I do not rush. Rushing is for men who still believe they have somewhere to go. I spend 20 minutes preparing the fire, shavings of dry birch bark followed by thin sprigs of larch. I watch the smoke rise, a thin blue-gray ribbon that carries the memory of every fire I have ever sat beside, the acrid peat of the north, the oily pitch of the Levant, the salty driftwood of the coast. I sit in my heavy oak chair, the wood polished by my own presence, and I watch the light. The sun here does not colonize the sky. It negotiates with the clouds, a soft, diffused glow that reveals the world in shades of moss and stone. My task for the morning is the maintenance of the garden, a small patch of earth where I grow onions, leeks, and a few medicinal herbs that I learned of in the hospitals of Acre. There is a deep, quiet comfort in the weeding. I kneel in the damp soil, my knees protected by a piece of thick leather, and I pull the wild grass from around the leeks, one by one. Thrust, grip, pull. I count the weeds. 57 this morning. I spend an hour contemplating the persistence of the thistle. It is a crusader among plants, stubborn and armored, refusing to accept that it is not wanted. By midday, I walk to the village to buy a loaf of bread and perhaps a small crock of butter. The walk is exactly 980 paces from my door to the baker's stall. I know every stone, every puddle, and every bend in the track. I watch the way the mud has settled in the ruts left by the grain carts. I notice that the miller has repaired his fence with a piece of unseasoned ash that will warp before the winter. This is the extent of my news. I do not ask about the wars in the south or the succession of the dukes. Those things are like the wind in the high branches, loud and consequential, yet they do not touch the forest floor where I exist. The baker, a man whose world is defined by the temperature of his oven and the quality of his flour, nods to me. To him, I am merely the old knight, a fixture of the landscape as unchanging and as silent as the stone cross in the churchyard. I carry my bread home in a linen bag, the warmth of the loaf a small, fleeting mercy against my chest. The afternoon is the time of the great cleaning. Even though I no longer wear the iron, the habits of the campaign are etched into my soul. I bring out the chest from beneath my bed, the same oak chest that vibrated in the back of the cart and groaned in the hold of the ship. I open it, and the smell of the Levant rushes out, a faint, ghostly mixture of dry dust, old oil, and the sharp metallic tang of rusted mail. I take out the hauberk ring by ring, and I lay it on the wooden table. It is no longer a suit of armor. It is a relic of a different life. I take a piece of rough cloth and a small bowl of sand mixed with vinegar, and I begin to scrub. Scrub, rinse, wipe. I spend 3 hours on a single sleeve. I am not cleaning it for battle. I am cleaning it to keep the silence at bay. I check the hinges of the gauntlets, moving them back and forth. Creak, snap, creak. I oil the leather straps, feeling the suppleness return to the hide. I am a servant of the equipment, even now. I find a small dent in the breastplate that I received at the breach of the wall, and I trace it with my thumb. It is a hole in time, a physical memory of a second when the world was loud and hot, but now it is just a cold indentation in a piece of gray iron. I spend the late afternoon sitting on the stone bench by my door, watching the shadows of the forest stretch across the valley. I play a game with the wind. I try to predict which tree will be the first to sway when a gust comes down from the peaks. The tall pine near the spring is usually the first. It is proud and top-heavy. The oaks are more patient. They wait until the wind is a roar before they even acknowledge its presence. I have spent years watching these trees, and I have realized that they have more in common with the knights I knew than any living man. They stand their ground, they endure the winter, and they die where they were planted. I count the birds returning to the woods, 12 crows, a solitary hawk, and a flurry of small, nameless finches that move like gray smoke. I wonder if the hawk sees the world as a map of prey, or if it too is just counting the miles. When the evening chill begins to descend, I retreat into my cottage and light a single tallow candle. The flame is small and erratic, throwing long, jittery shadows of my armor across the walls. I eat my bread and cheese, the sounds of my own chewing the only noise in the room. I find myself thinking about the desert, but the images are losing their color. The white heat is turning into a pale gray. The red crosses are fading into a dusty brown. The Holy War is becoming a ledger of numbers. 40,000 rotations of a wheel, 300 beetles in a sea biscuits, 7,000 arcs of a swinging lantern. I am the only one who holds these numbers now. When I die, they will vanish, and the world will be exactly as it was before I took the cross. There is a profound, quiet peace in this insignificance. I am not a hero of the faith. I am a man who witnessed the passage of time in a very hot and very dusty place. I prepare for bed with the same slow, methodical ritual I used in the tents of the siege. I fold my tunic. I check my boots for cracks. I bank the fire. I lie down on my mattress of straw and wool, the weight of the blankets a familiar, grounding pressure. I listen to the sounds of the night, the rhythmic tick, tick, tick of a wood-boring beetle in the rafters, the distant, muffled lowing of a cow in the village, the long, sighing exhalation of the wind in the chimney. I am sinking into the earth, one day at a time, one breath at a time. I am the crusader who returned, but I am also the dust that settled on the road. I am the shadow of the oak, the silence of the stone, and the memory of the wind. I let go of the day, I let go of the iron, and I fall into the deep, cool well of a sleep that has no dreams of glory, only the infinite, velvet dark of a world that is finally, perfectly still.